So I think we have good grounds for believing in a transcendent cause of the universe endowed with the attributes I suggested. Secondly, the moral argument has gone largely undiscussed tonight. I've argued that if God doesn't exist, then there is no transcendent standard for objective moral values and duties, and we're just lost in sociocultural relativism. But that secondly, it is plausible that objective moral values and duties do exist. Any argument for moral skepticism will be based upon premises which are less obviously true than the existence of objective moral duties and values themselves. And therefore, we've got good grounds for believing that God exists as a foundation for objective moral values and duties. Thirdly, with respect to the resurrection, all Professor Atkins is reduced to saying now is that the appearances of Jesus are comparable to Elvis sightings. Well, it seems to me that the Elvis sightings were either lies, as is most probable, or hallucinations. But neither of those explanations is a good explanation of the resurrection appearances. The resurrection appearances were clearly not lies. I'm not aware of any Elvis sighter who has been willing to go to a tortuous death for his belief in having seen Elvis risen from the dead. The resurrection appearances are not hallucinations. The diversity of the appearances, many groups and individuals, different locales, different circumstances, believers, unbelievers, skeptics alike. Secondly, it wouldn't have led to belief in Jesus' resurrection. Seeing hallucinations of Jesus would have at most led them to believe that Jesus had been assumed into heaven, but not risen from the dead, which ran contrary to Jewish beliefs. And thirdly, it leaves the empty tomb unexplained. In order to explain the empty tomb, you've got to conjoin an independent hypothesis to the hallucination hypothesis in order to explain all the data. So his explanation has inadequate explanatory scope and therefore fails as a good explanation. It's less simple than the explanation the disciples gave that Jesus is risen from the dead. Finally, have we seen comparably good arguments for atheism tonight? I think in all honesty we'd have to say no, we have not. The problem of evil was mentioned but then dropped. Dr. Atkins has tried to cast this as a debate between science and religion. But if you've noticed, I offered arguments for my theism. He's not dealing with a preacher here tonight. He's dealing with a philosopher who has offered deductive arguments for theism. The only person who has appealed to faith in tonight's debate has been Dr. Atkins, who has appealed to his naturalistic scientism and the omnipotence of science in explaining everything. I have not appealed to faith. Rather, I have appealed to scientific evidence for premises in arguments leading to a conclusion having theological significance. So when I weigh the evidence on both sides of the scale, it seems to me clear which way the evidence points.
Thank you. Professor Atkins, your closing statement, please.
Well, Dr. Craig has presented arguments that would have enthralled and convinced his audience 1,000 years ago, but now actually do seem very tired. His arguments really have been of three kinds. One argument is logic, but logic is a process of deducing consequences from an initial assertion. It has nothing to say about the validity of that assertion, and indeed adds nothing to the assertion. Of course, if it turns out that observations support the consequences, then there is reason to believe in the validity of the original assertion. But you can't proceed, as Dr. Craig attempts to do, by logic alone. It must be supported by evidence. Dr. Craig presented no such evidence. The second argument is apparently scientific and boils down to the investigation of causality and the inference that there must be a first cause. This is a powerful classical argument that has survived for 1,000 years, yet it is empty, for it is merely an extrapolation of the current properties of the universe to an era when it did not exist. And the third type of evidence is personal. involving the acceptance of unlikely, indeed impossible events, and the ascription of the springs of morality to authority, rather than seeking a deeper explanation in terms of our evolutionary and cerebral history. Dr. Craig favours anecdote over evidence and assertion over reflection. Neither seems to me to be a basis for the rest of us believing in God. I presented 6 arguments: that there is no need for a creator God, that there is no need for a designer God, not touched by the opposition this evening, no need for a purposeful God, not touched by the opposition this evening, that there's no evidence for an all-loving God, and although we did just touch upon that, it was not rebutted, and that there is no need for an umpire God, because we can look after our own morality, thank you very much. And there is no need for an interventionist God, because there has never, ever been a miracle of any magnitude, certainly not a resurrection. Let me take you back to beyond Dr. Craig's favoured milieu of 1,000 years ago, into an imagined era that did not exist, when there was no belief in God, but when science had become established and had succeeded to the point that it has today. Not all questions of great import had been answered, but enormous knowledge had been assembled about the workings of the world. Dr. Craig then enters in a blaze of glory and offers his answer to the questions that still puzzled the scientists of the day. Forget your struggles, he says. There is one very simple answer. God did it. Quite frankly, no one would have taken him seriously and would see his assertion as intellectually empty. 1,000 years ago, Dr. Craig's arguments would have fallen on ready ears. Today, they also fall, regrettably, on ready ears. But they are the ears that are determined not to revise their prejudices and are fixed to brains that are too lazy to struggle with more complicated explanations. We should be enormously thankful to the religious of the past for showing that the human brain was adept at identifying and struggling with deeply important questions. But we should be enormously proud of the fact that the collective human mind, through the scientific method of collecting evidence, is now in the process of arriving at a deep, true understanding of all there is. And all there is does not include God. Thank you.
Well, that concludes the formal part of this evening's debate. Unlike some debates, we will not take a vote. The purpose of this debate, I think, in many ways, is to give people arguments, reasons, things for them to take forward, things to work upon. And I think it's a tribute to the two people on this platform, Bill Craig and Peter Atkins, that we have had a stimulating and very, very profound debate on such an important topic. For those who have a sense of history, the last time these two gentlemen debated was in 1998 in Atlanta. The title was slightly longer than the title today, but it was similar. That debate still exists on the internet, and what I found fascinating is to see how the arguments have developed in that sort of period. But we've had an enormously enjoyable, an enormously stimulating, and a very profitable evening. And can I ask you to thank our two debaters now, please? Now, we have but a small time remaining to us. Not enough time, I'm afraid, to take question and answers from the hall, but we have with us Peter Williams, who may be known to some of you. He's philosopher in residence at the Damaris Trust, and also is a lecturer in journalism and communication in Norway. He has experience of chairing discussions, and so what he is going to do, in a sense, is to just take a few highlights and, in a more informal way, to discuss or to ask our two people to answer the questions. My suggestion is you just take the format that we've got here, and we will have perhaps a quarter of an hour to talk on that. So, Peter, thank you.
Well, okay, we're on. Marvellous, thank you very much. We were going to move to some more comfortable chairs, but we don't have time for that. So these gentlemen will have to bear with us on this one. I thought that was absolutely fascinating, and particularly, I think one issue that came across for me was this whole issue of whether this was really a debate between science and religion, or perhaps more broadly, actually a debate between science and philosophy, as approaches to how we know things, how we answer questions. So, Bill, are you simply a pessimistic philosopher telling us what we can't know and then plugging in your favourite theological conclusions?
I hope that that's clear to everyone here tonight, that that's not my approach. I am an avid reader of science with an avocation in cosmology. I'm very, very interested in the question of the finitude of the past, and also in the question of the fine-tuning of the universe for intelligent life, which we haven't discussed this evening. But what I'm arguing, to repeat, it's a carefully articulated claim, is that science can provide evidence for a premise in an argument leading to a conclusion having theological significance. So that premise, the universe began to exist, is a religiously neutral statement, which you can find in any textbook on astronomy and astrophysics. It is a statement to which scientific evidence is relevant. And that's all my appeal is to with respect to science, not to appeal to science to prove God or use God to plug up gaps in knowledge.
Okay, well, Professor Atkins, would you like to comment on what you think about philosophy trying to use science to do philosophy? Is that a mistake to try and answer questions in that method that sort of
philosophy
Craig
is a complete waste of time. I will soften that so that I'm allowed by the occasional philosopher in the audience to escape with my limbs intact this evening. I think philosophy is quite useful in terms of moral philosophy and so on, where awkward questions are resolved by interesting arguments. Philosophy has absolutely nothing to say about the nature of the world. It's completely blind. The only way that you can make progress in understanding the workings of the world is through the scientific method. That is, going out, making observations, and fitting them into a network of a reticulation, if you like, of theories. But philosophers are just a complete waste of time in terms of science, and they're a kind of sheet anchor.
Between these two guys, it's a good job I'm sitting in the middle, I think.
Do I get a chance to come back on that?
You want to come back? Sure.
I think that's really a naive view. The man who claims to have no need of philosophy is the one who is most apt to be
Didn't say that, Bill. I didn't say that at all. I said that philosophy does not enable you to understand the workings of the world.